Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Zainab Hussain. I am a reporter inside Housing and I'll be chairing today's webinar. I'm joined by a group of experts and I will pass on to them to introduce themselves. I just want to remind you all on how this is going to work. So each expert joined by us today is going to do a presentation on the topic, and we invite you to send over some questions using the Ask a Questions tab during the session. And then towards the end of the session, we'll be taking in some questions. So please do keep sending over your questions throughout the webinar. And yeah, I'll leave it to the experts to do their presentation.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Colley. I'm the Director of Product Innovation at LHC. We're going to start you off today. We are a framework provider, if you're not aware of us. We're a not-for-profit. I'm going to take you through a very, very brief background of who we are. We're a quality-led framework provider, and given the topic that we're talking about today, nothing is more important, and we've had quite a history in fire doors within our business. So I'm Director of Product. I essentially run the department that puts together the frameworks. Paul, who I'll hand over to shortly, is one of our technical experts. He is in industry and has a wealth of knowledge, and that knowledge is baked into our products, so you can be assured that they are fit for purpose. Paul is going to cover a kind of state of the nation and our experience with fire doors. We have a framework going through at the moment that specifically targets fire doors. And then we'll do some last thoughts and hand over to the other experts. So thank you. So LHC Procurement Group has had a long history. We're a not-for-profit framework provider with contracting authority status under the new Act. We're made up of a board that's over 50% publicly funded bodies, particularly local authorities and housing associations. Way back in 1966, we were established by local authorities. We used to be part of the London Borough of Hillingdon. So it's our 60-year birthday this year, and we've been working in the public sector for that full life. We work with more than 700 public organisations across the country, and we are regionalised, as you can see in our little map here. So we have experts on a regional basis across the country, based in Scotland, Wales, the Southwest, London and the north of England. So it's local people for local clients to deal with your kind of local issues, as it were. And we're the only framework provider to kind of offer that service. So why should you care? Why should you choose our frameworks, and what kind of sets us apart? We're fully compliant with the new Act, which is a given, but we also follow the FEC 1 framework contract, which was developed by Professor David Mosey, who's part of Constructing Excellence and University King's College. This allows flexibility and collaboration for your own individual needs, and you as the client and your contractors set your own individual contract terms, which is really important for the control of your projects, and especially when we're talking about this today, it's exceptionally important that is fully controlled. We're fully transparent on fees and how we charge those, and that's through a flat levy rate, which is fully compliant with the new Act. And most importantly, especially for this topic, we carry out extensive pre-market engagement, both on a regional and national level, with both yourselves as clients, with experts in industry, and with our own expertise that we've gained over the years in the various areas that we operate in, to make sure that the product is fit for purpose, it's compliant, and it's technically excellent, so you can be assured of it. And we will stand up there with you when it comes to that. We have gold standard service, which essentially means that we're recognised by government. So we're a gold standard verified framework provider. This scheme is managed by Constructing Excellence. The scheme is called Constructing the Gold Standard Verification, and we're only one of 7 framework providers out of more than 2,000 across the UK that's reached this standard, and we're the only one that has implemented it nationwide across our 5 regions. So we take this technical excellence very, very seriously. And on the social value side, we have done exceptionally well this year. We've done just under 2 million, so 1.9 million. So we're a not-for-profit public sector framework provider. We're committed to making the most positive impact across the country and across the regions that we operate in. And over the years, as well as this figure, we've donated several million. I think we're up to 10 million now since we launched our social value strategy. So it's going particularly well. We've been around for a long time, and we certainly think that this is the most important aspect of the business that we can give back to the industry. We're looking to technically upskill clients. We're looking to technically upskill the contractors that we work with, and Paul will touch more on that shortly. And we found through this particular framework and through the procurement process that there's still a lot of work to do here, and that's where we're looking to make an impact. And just very briefly on our fire door journey. So this is our 32 years of experience is what we've already got. We're just about to enter into the new framework, which will launch shortly. Our last generation C8 has attracted over £56 million in projects. And all of that essentially means is we can build all of that experience, all of that buying power, and put together a really good product that's compliant and will support you through your fire door journey as you progress through your stock. And finally, before I hand over to Paul, it's been a kind of journey, this framework, and we started the tendering process in September. But as Paul will allude to, there has been some hand-holding that's been required. So we're a little bit behind schedule, but we're currently going through factory assessments. That sets us apart. We actually go to the factories of all the manufacturers that apply to our framework to check that they're doing what they say they're doing. And we're one of the only framework providers that do that as well. So we're completing that. This framework in July, so we'll have a new compliant route to market for all of the needs from that side of things. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand over to Paul, who's going to take you through a little bit more of the journey on the technical side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. So my name is Paul Dawson. I'm Group Technical Manager at LHC Procurement Group based in Uxbridge. And as Graham has already alluded to, we have our regional business units, which we ultimately support our clients and contractors within those regions. Just a brief history of myself. I'm still involved in skills and standards development. I'm involved in education and lecturing, and I'm still also out there doing contracting, as well as working with LHC Procurement Group, developing our construction frameworks. So a bit of history, construction quality. Anyone who's done anything academia-wise within construction will remember the Latham reports, the Egan reports, obviously the outcome from the Grenfell. There's a common theme that goes through all of these, and every time it's quality, 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 quality. The industry could do better. We could collaborate better. We could be more transparent. It's just a common theme that goes through. But the two I've issued illustrate there, Latham report and Egan report, go back to the 90s, which is a chunk of time ago. Grenfell, as I've just mentioned, phase 2 report, the outcome, everything was avoidable. It's all avoidable. There was 58 recommendations that came out of the report, which was looking at improvements within the industry, improving the regulations, mandating of the fire risk assessments, accreditations, enhancing safety. And then obviously there was the key findings, which were systematic dishonesty, flawed regulations, catastrophic failures to ensure safety. Hopefully, as I go through some of the slides and the other presenters are here, we can talk about ourselves with the industry and what we are doing to change this and make sure that it's a quality-driven, safe industry. Building safety regulator was established, obviously, after Grenfell to look after safety in high-risk residential buildings. That now has kind of moved from the HSE ownership into a separate kind of management, but that is there in order to ensure safety moving forward. We've highlighted a couple of issues. It can happen. It does happen. there's a list of numerous, it's not an exhaustive list, but there's a list of numerous fires that we've had over the past few years that have hit the headlines. Craven Park, Slough, Aldgate, another one in Slough, Popular, and the list goes on. It's not hard to find the issues that we're having within the industry, and ultimately we want to get to the bottom of kind of what went wrong and link all of this up and say make sure that we are as safe as we can be and our containment within the buildings is suitably. The C8 and FD9 ethos, Graham's already alluded to how we've evolved our products over the last 32 years. We look at within our fire doors, certainly on the FD9 framework, we look at the full 360 review of not only the products, but also of the installers. So we are the only framework provider that goes out to look at manufacturing processes. I've been spending the last 3 weeks or so darted around the country looking at different processes for timber and composite fire doors. Going back to 2020, we were probably the only framework provider and the first framework provider to insist on bi-directional testing for timber fire doors, as well as the composites. So as I say, we look at the full sourcing of the products, make sure they're manufactured in accordance with the accreditation agreements, make sure that we have a compliant door set or that comes out the factory, but also looking at the competency and qualifications of the installer, bearing in mind that the installer's third-party accreditation is separate to the installing accreditation, so we look at that as well. The questions, if it all does go wrong and you're in the court, you will be asked these questions. Did you know about the golden thread? Do you have accurate data? Can you trace your auditability of your products? Are you aware of the deviation from scope of the products? Why do you accept the use of another's accreditation, etc.? The list goes on, and you will be expected to answer these questions. As I mentioned, the factory visits, we've been out, we look through the factories, we ensure compliance of the products against the approvals that they have. We look at the quality management, the safety, and the ultimately make sure that when a product goes out of the door of the factories, all the component parts are as the tested door assembly, and they're not mix and matched, which could give rise to early failure. We check for unauthorized modifications. We verify the hardware compatibility. We look at the certification, the labeling, the traceability, the integrity of the products, the glazing, the aperture size and training, and we match all of that against their field of application scope assessments and a documentation for the products that have been approved. A quick little list of the what we look at. We look at the sustainability, traceability, responsibility. We look at consistency of the build quality to make sure that the door assemblies or door sets that come out of the factory are the same any day of the week, any time of the day, any time of the month, any time of the year. They're all built to the same quality standard and approvals. And we also look at gateway processes to make sure that where we do walk through a factory, if there is anything, so a CNC machine, if it's kind of a little bit out of calibration and the locking mechanisms or the spy holes or something is not quite right, it is absolutely picked up and quarantined and taken off the production line, so the manufacturer doesn't put not to standard door sets out there on the market. Contractor competencies I've run over. We look at the skills, experience, knowledge and behavior. Behavior is a big one. We look at the organizational capability, the technical proficiency, the management systems, the compliance. We look at change management compliance and ethical conduct. A lot of the contractors that we have been with us for a good number of years now, and going back to the gold standard, we build those collaborations and that's how we can move forward with improving quality. Forms of compliance, how do we check it? We look at declarations, certifications, accreditations. We make sure they're in date. We make sure they're third party endorsed. We look at information statements, records. We look at reporting plans. We look for, as I mentioned earlier, gateway compliance. We look for change control, management structures, and probably one of the big key ones is subcontractor management as well, to ensure that everything is appropriately managed and quality remains forefront. And obviously third party audit and inspection evidence is absolutely key as well. Some scenarios we look at, or within the FD9 framework, we do have other fire safety frameworks. Within the FD9 framework, we want UCAS ISOs, and they must be UCAS ISOs. There's a couple of illustrations on the screen there. One on the left is not a UCAS. The one on the right is endorsed, and it will have the UCAS official number. We look at those because then absolutely we make sure that that process is audited correctly, and it's not just a pay for certificate. Scenario here, I need some fire doors fitted. We've got the golden thread of information, and we need to know the whole history of those products. We need to know, as say, the sourcing right the way through to any alterations, installations. We need to know all of the data, all of the time within those products that are installed. So we do take these requirements seriously, and you absolutely need to manufacture and look at test reports, data sheets, third-party certification for fire doors, etc. We need to know, or we will assess the products and make sure that you are getting what you're paying for. A scenario here, I've got a certificate from a contractor. These are real scenarios that we're having when we're doing this evaluation for our fire door framework. And they've stated that as a Q-marked approved fire door installer, we are audited biannually, and our certificate is awarded based on us meeting the TRADA requirements. Every scheme is granular. There is a couple of standards put on here. The STD 052 is the fire door installation standard, but the 058 is the third party inspection maintenance. They're separate. So it's not just a case of I have a certificate and I can do anything. It's individually certified. Another one here, the contractors have provided this primary test evidence for fire doors. This effectively is a field of application, and it will cover a whole raft of products. And when you read through, this is an engineering assessment that the products are expected fire performance will comply. It's not primary test, and this is again what we're getting. We're having this in place of primary test, so we throw these back and say, no, we want the primary test. Closing thoughts, LHC, we go through a rigorous, robust process in order to ensure that the products that you get with your fire doors are what they are, and they will serve the purpose and the times. But we do a audit assessment up to a moment in time, up to when they're appointed on the framework. We can support with call-offs and projects if asked, but as a client, you do also need to take some ownership from when those contractors are on site to make sure that all the good work that we've done continues through on the install. And on closing thoughts, Building Safety Act has basically changed the rules of the game. It's not about what you can do now, it's about what you can prove. And we're here to help you through this compliance headache. And that's my slides, and I shall now hand over to Hannah.
Hello everyone, my name's Hannah Mansell and I'm a design engineer, but I've worked in the fire door sector in many different guises, product design, testing, getting products certified, etc., etc. I run a consultancy called Adorability, and I'm also facilitator for the UK Fire Door Think Tank, which is a not-for-profit which is all about collaborating and looking to future-proof safety within the sector. So I've just got some questions for the audience actually to start off with. My job here is really to illustrate some of the themes that Graham and Kevin have been speaking about. But 4 questions for you first. The first 2 is to consider where we are now and to look back. What impact do you want to have within your work? And if you were to fast forward 30 years, what sort of legacy do you want to leave within the building safety landscape? And the next 2 questions, cast your mind forward. Let's consider the future innovations and maybe the new materials which are starting to emerge in the fire door world. But what do they mean for the next area of emerging risk or focus for the industry? And then look at the whole building safety landscape. What's keeping you awake at night? What worries you most? And what collaboratively could we do together about it? So, as I say, I've got 4 case studies. They're very quick, but I want to illuminate some of the themes that my colleagues are speaking about. So, the first one is it's just a fire door, right? The second one is the approach in existing buildings and dealing with existing fire doors. Where do you really start? The next one is all around the data trail. Now, I used to call this the paperwork trail, but shifting over to the data trail. But really, this is about traceability in the real world, what it does give you and what it doesn't give you. And then the gap in between. I spend a lot of time considering the fresh air, the gap in between different systems of building construction. And I want to just leave you with a thought about interfaces and system thinking. So cast your mind back maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and you'll consider that probably awareness around the role of fire doors was not really very high. Of course, great fires such as Grenfell since then have really focused the mind. And I will say that there's a growing awareness. But what was the landscape like before Grenfell? It was really full of assumptions. So it looks like a fire door, it smells like a fire door, and you'd probably find someone who was prepared to put their name by that. But of course, we understand these products and systems in completely different terms now. Now, Kevin, who's on next, is going to really go into some detail around these subjects, but there's a whole lot of huge challenges facing the sector at the moment. So the removal of the national classes, the transition from BS to European frameworks and classifications, of course, the Building Safety Act and the Building Safety Regulator, but particularly the planning approval gateways, the different role of the duty holders, the clients, the principal designers, and the principal contractors. But equally, for someone like me, I spend a lot of my time with the specialist subcontractors, specialist designers who are really bringing the details of the system together. Fire door works, of course, majority of the time notifiable to building control. And how do we consider the emerging competence of both the individual and the organisation in this space? There's a little bit here about information as well. The need to provide residents fire safety information, including around their fire doors, and of course the regular inspection of fire doors in common areas. So really the learning from this slide is that there's a huge focus on the specification and the early planning and due diligence of these products. So the first one for you, it's just a fire door, right? So have a look at this image on the screen. So it's just one that I've sketched for you. And you're probably thinking, Hannah will never make it as an architect. But it's just a simple layout of a made up building. So this one's a residential building. You can see all of our individual apartments and you can see all of these different fire doors. Now, of course, we would hope that they weren't all open at the same time. But I've highlighted them to start to express that depending on the function and the location and how that door is being used and what it's got to protect, it can have a vastly different specification. So someone turning up saying, Hannah, I need a 30-minute fire door, doesn't really answer the question, does it? So moving on, excuse me, there's a lot on this slide. So just take your eyes to start with to the top right-hand corner, the secret life of fire doors. So we don't often see them doing their job in a fire. But what we want fire doors to do is all around compartmentation of the building, keeping the fire in one place for as long as possible so that we can have a safe evacuation or until the emergency services come to bring the fire under control. But of course, in other buildings, like complex, sort of maybe large buildings, large number of people, we wouldn't be able to do a safe and quick evacuation. So fire doors can also provide the role of creating safe refuges within the building until the fire is brought under control. And of course, all of those routes out of the building, the corridors, the stairwells, these are the routes out of the building for those escaping. However, they're also the safe routes in for the emergency services. So we need to keep those routes clear and safe. But as I say, that's almost in the secret life of a fire door because we don't often get to see them doing that. So just cast your eye to the rest of the screen. I'm not going to read through this list, but just take on board that most fire doors have got multiple performance characteristics. And really the learning from this slide is you can't go after one of those performance characteristics at the great cost of another. So you need to consider them as a holistic approach. And again, you'll probably think, phew, I'm not going to read my way through this slide, but just have a scan through. Getting down to a little bit more foundational knowledge, the materials and components that go into fire door systems these days are a lot more complex. It can actually go to hundreds of different components, and these are all working together as a system. So although it's really useful to understand the performance of each different component and how it contributes to the system, it's the system performance that we're also interested in. So on to the second case study, existing buildings, existing fire doors. So here's just a few snapshots from the gallery on my phone. It's just full of doors, but this is from a particular special building. It's a listed building, and you can just take on board the wide variety of different doors that we've got in this space. Now, Graham touched upon it earlier. You know, we would all want to walk into a building and find that there was a complete documented building history from the last decades, but more often than not, that might not be the case. So really, my experience is that in existing buildings, it can be a real case-by-case approach to understand what history exists and also what are the current needs of the users of the building. Considering those can actually help define a specification very early that is going to answer a lot of requirements from a 360-degree view. So just moving on to that data trail, the images that I've got on screen, again, a collection from my travels, but just to show you a few of the kind of traceability marks that I expect you'll probably be quite familiar with seeing. So my point of this slide is I want to say that there is on-product traceability, and it's quite widely used in the fire door world. There are also digital methods out there as well. But really, this type of traceability, it's just a starting point to traceability. It certainly doesn't tell you the whole different process, the background supporting information, the performance of that product without further investigation. So really the learning from this slide is on product traceability, it may only take you so far. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to explain that a little bit better. So on this slide, you can see quite a nice, neat process flow. And actually, Graham, you did a nice introduction to this earlier. But really, this is starting to show to you the different ways that products can move through the fire door sector. So starting as components and raw materials, starting to be put together with different types of components, such as the blanks, the leaves, the frames. It can pass through the hands of fire door processors or fabricators and can be placed on the market in a wide variety of ways. So as we move across to the left-hand side of the screen, you can start to see all a load of other different stakeholders who are all getting involved at these stages. And actually each one of those different individuals and stakeholders is probably going to need to know different information about the product. And of course, the end users, often forgotten about until too late, but early engagement with them can really help to define what the specific requirements are and save issues later on. So the image on the previous slide was a nice and neat one, but here's a real bit of product traceability. This is just one corner of a traceability map for a particular piece of traceability that I did some years ago. But you can start to see things start to get a little bit complex with components traveling up and down the supply chain. So again, probably a very relevant image to consider when we do it against the backdrop of how Graham was talking about supply chain traceability and verification previously. And so the data trail. Again, everyone, I probably don't expect you to read your way through everything on this slide, but I just wanted to start to bring to life to you that in the background supporting a fire door is not one bit of information. It's not one certificate or one marketing brochure. It's a whole different range of supporting information, which actually may come from a number of different sources. So again, in the middle of this slide, you see the yellow highlighted box, manufacturers' marketing literature and performance claims. Often on projects, that's the first piece of information that you get to see. But just take on board that it's certainly not the whole story, and that it's likely that deep dive due diligence is going to need to be done into a whole portfolio of data. So just to leave you with a couple more, the gap in between the interfaces and systems thinking. So many people think that fire doors are quite simple products, and they consider them in isolation, even to the point of looking at some of those earlier themes like test evidence of the system, compatibility between ironmongery, etc. But it's actually about a little bit of a wider topic. It's not just the system of the product, but it's the system within the building and how it interfaces up against different building structures and services within the building. So here's just a few more images from my travels. And as you can see, in real life situations, and particularly in existing buildings, we're often dealing with a whole different load of different interfaces and penetrations where different building services are going through. So again, really the learning from this slide is not to just look at the product, but to look at its surrounding construction, consider how it's sealed into the aperture, and also consider all of the other services and penetrations that are likely to be near it. So just a few key learnings to leave you with. Thinking about the product, it's not just about the product, but thinking also about that 360-degree performance that helps you define the product specification. By putting the people and their requirements, the end users and all of those stakeholders front and center in your specification decisions should help you answer the specific requirements of what they need and actually save a lot of time and probably budget later on. I've called it paperwork here, but think about the traceability, think about the data trail. And of course, these documents are not just to be sourced from various parties and recorded forevermore. There needs to be a really strong and robust process of due diligence to make sure that they are absolutely relevant to the product which is being supplied on site. So anyway, thank you very much. That's all from me now, but I'm going to pass over to Kevin Underwood, who is Technical Director of the British Woodworking Federation. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, as Hannah introduced me, I'm Kevin Underwood, Technical Director of the British Woodworking Federation. And the British Woodworking Federation is the trade association for woodworking and joinery manufacturing industry in the UK. We operate the Fire Door Alliance, the FDA, and we own and manage the Fire Door Safety Week campaign. Just thought I'd start my presentation by looking at some of the guidance available for people to use when interested in what they need for fire doors. The devolved authorities in the United Kingdom each have their own guidance documents, and I'm just listing them here, the main ones. So we've got Approved Document B for England and Wales, Technical Handbook for Scotland, and Technical Booklet E for Northern Ireland. However, as been discussed in the past and in connection with Grenfell, compliance with the guidance in the approved documents, in the guidance documents generally, is not the only way of demonstrating compliance with building regulations. So we also have other guidance available, such as the British Standard Code of Practice, BS 9991 and 9999, and also documents in relation to schools such as Building Bulletin 100. I think we may see as buildings become more complex that other forms of compliance with the building regulation functional requirements are going to come, rather than just relying on the guidance in, for example, Approved Document B. Now, as a consequence of the Building Safety Act, we've seen secondary legislation come into place. I thought it's very useful to look here at the guidance in relation to the Fire Safety England regulations, and particularly Regulation 10, which puts emphasis on compliance for fire doors. Now, this is linking into another piece of regulation, which is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, or just the FSO, which looks at the responsibilities of responsible persons in maintaining fire safety in the common areas of buildings. And it's particularly useful because it puts emphasis on the function of the fire doors. So we see here that it starts off by setting a baseline where the responsible persons need to ensure that they have a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment, and that there is no fire risk assessment. And when there is no risk assessment in place, that they need to arrange for this to be carried out as soon as practically possible. So they're establishing a baseline for the performance of the fire safety in the building. Now, these are legal requirements under Regulation 10 of the Fire Safety England regulations. So what do they need to do? Well, fire resisting doors are one of the most important measures to safeguard the means of escape from fire. The fire risk assessment should already have identified the doors in question and determine whether the doors are adequate to resist fire spread of fire and smoke into or within the common parts. And they should have already taken steps to maintain the doors in good order, and where it has been found that the existing doors are inadequate, they need to be replaced, and this must be done by a competent person. As with all fire safety measures, fire doors need to be kept in good working order, in good repair. Wear and tear, for example, can result in defects. The objective of Regulation 10 is to ensure that such defects do not materially undermine the ability of the doors adequately to prevent fire and smoke spread, whether to extent originally designed or as verified adequate in most recent risk assessments. There is a requirement to provide information to residents. Residents have an important role to play, ensuring that if there is a fire in a flat, the flat entrance door is an effective barrier to spread of fire smoke into common parts. Regulation 10 requires that residents are given information that fire doors should be kept shut when not in use. They should never be propped open. Residents or their guests should not tamper with self-closing devices, and residents should report any fault or damage immediately to the responsible person. Remember, that's the duty holder under the fire safety order. For routine checking of fire doors, Regulation 10 requires that if the top story of the building is above 11 meters, so that's about 4 stories in height, typically with building with 4 stories, the responsible person must use their best endeavors to check all flat entrance doors at least every 12 months and carry out checks of any fire doors in communal areas at least every 3 months. The doors in communal areas are subject to greater wear and tear and to greater potential for damage than the flat entrance doors, so must be examined more regularly. So the recommended checks. This is in the guidance document around applying Regulation 10. They should check that the resident has not replaced an existing fire-resisting flat entrance door with a new non-fire-resisting door. This may sound strange, but particularly in balcony access doors where the flat entrance doors are on the outside, they're external doors. This has been the case where residents replacing the doors have just assumed that they can replace it with a standard non-fire external door set. That's not the case. They do need to have elements of fire resistance. Letterboxes should firmly close and not be jammed open. And when the letterbox has been fitted to a door that has not previously had one, the resident will need to confirm that new letterbox is suitable for use in fire-resisting doors and has been fitted by a specialist contractor. There are elements in relation to that. The door should be one that's suitable to receive a letter plate, not just whether the letter plate is fire protected, and any intumescents are fitted also. That's why it should be fitted by a specialist. They should look to see that there is no damage to or defects in the door frame or the securing wall that might affect the ability to resist the spread of fire or smoke. The condition of the fire-resisting glass and glazing system in the door panels and any associated side or over panels forming part of the door set retains their ability to resist the spread of fire and smoke. There should be no obvious defects in the hinges, for example, missing or loose screws or any other element of ironmongery. Intumescent strips, which are those parts that expand in the event of a fire and close the gap between the edge of the door and the frame. And smoke seals, which don't have to respond. They're active when there is ambient temperature. It doesn't have to be a high temperature. They, if present, are undamaged and make contact with the door edge or frame and have not been painted over during decoration activities. The gap between the door and the frame should not be too large, and there is an effective self-closing device on fire doors of flat entrances and fire doors within common parts. In some premises, corridor and lobby doors might be held open on magnetic hold open devices. For this to be the case, there would need to be for smoke detectors, activation of which could cause a door to close. Care should be taken when checking the self-closing devices that these doors to use the test button provided and not to just pull the door from the magnet. It's in the wrong place. So specifying fire door requirements. Key characteristics of a fire door are fire resistance and smoke control, but they will have other performance requirements. I think Hannah covered this quite extensively in her presentation. So just again, making the point that fire doors have other functions, and the other functions should not compromise its ability to provide fire resistance and smoke control. Supporting evidence, of course, test reports, the base evidence, but we would consider direct application reports, extended application reports, field of application reports, or other technical assessments. The technical assessments should be produced in accordance with the Passive Fire Protection Forum PFPF guides, and there is a project underway within BSI to draft a new guide to technical assessments, BS 8623. Smoke control. The recommended class that we're looking for moving forward is SA4, when classified against EN 13501 Part 2. That's just looking at four-sided smoke control. It's not applicable in the building regulation guidance at the moment, which refers to smoke control at the head and jambs only. Installation of fire doors. Fire doors, the supporting structure should be able to support the installation of the fire door. Fire door installers are discouraged from attempting to make good any deficiencies around the surrounding structure that may have been identified on site. It's not the fire door installer's responsibility to undertake design work and building work to make openings right for receiving fire doors. When installing a fire door, should ensure that there is correct sealing between the frame and the supporting structure, and the sealants or any foams, linear gap seals that are used should have been appropriately tested and proven. Moving on to building regulations, Hannah mentioned this in her presentation, that installation or work on fire doors is building work. If it's either going to be covered under the original construction, under the original building notification, or if it's just replacing fire doors, then this could be considered a material alteration, which again is building work. We also have at the moment a call for evidence from the building safety regulator under the heading of conditions for authorization, review and fire door set self-certification. And this is looking at a competent person scheme or self-certification scheme for signing off the installation of fire doors, because it states in this document that replacements on fire doors is building work and should be notified to building control. It also goes on to say that some maintenance work on fire doors would also be considered building work. So it's important here that in most cases, when either installing originally or replacing fire doors, building control must be involved and they can oversee the work taking place. Now, because building work is taking place, Chapter 3 of the Building Regulations 2010 for England require that people undertaking building work are competent. So we now have a legal requirement here in the Building Regulations that where a person is an individual, that they have the skills, knowledge, experience and behaviours necessary to do that work. Or where the person is not an individual, they have the organisational capability to carry out the building work in accordance with all relevant requirements. How do those who work with fire doors demonstrate their competence? Well, the Building Safety Act established the Industry Competence Committee, the ICC. So this is formed to provide strategic leadership, assistance and encouragement to facilitate the improvement of competence in the built environment industry. It advises both the building safety regulator and the industry on matters of competence. The Industry Competence Steering Group, then. The ICC established the Industry Competence Steering Group. The ICSG's communications and messaging is aligned with the ICC strategy and expectations. The ICSG covers construction products from manufacture through to demolition and disposal. Different sectors and disciplines are represented through sector-led groups, the SLGs, which develop competence frameworks and guidance within their agreed scope. If you want to get more information on the work of the ICSG, I would direct you towards the BSI's Communities Built Environment Competence Hub. This is managed by BSI and developed in collaboration with the ICSG and the Building Safety Regulator. And the hub's aim is to simplify a complex competence landscape by bringing trusted knowledge and resources together in one place, making it easy for every member to find what is important to them. Sector-led group SLG 10, the installer and maintenance of the envelope. This group was established to address installer and maintenance competence issues in the envelope installer sector, focusing on the development of competence frameworks. Oversees 33 groups across 5 categories, including fire doors. And I just thought I'd finish by looking at the golden thread. We've looked at the importance of information being maintained throughout the life of a building, and the Grenfell Tower inquiry, the previous reports, and the secondary legislation following the Building Safety Act do put in place the requirements for the golden thread. And the good guides around the golden thread that I found is one that's issued by the Construction Leadership Council. So it defines the golden thread. It should be individual, bespoke and specific to a building and a group of residents occupants. It should be continuous, holistic and requires a chain of responsibility. For example, clarity on who is responsible for updating the information. It should be an electronic information about the building that is created, obtained, updated, maintained and shared, and the information and processes that enable the right decisions to be made by the right people at the right time. The golden thread will alter and develop throughout the life of the building from design to occupation. At the design stage, it's the information to demonstrate how the design, if built, will comply with regulations. Construction, it's evidence that the approved design is being built and that any changes are managed and comply with building regulations. At handover and completion, it's evidence that the completed building complies with the building regulations and provides a comprehensive and accurate electronic record of the finished building for the accountable person. Accountable person is a duty holder under the Building Safety Act. In occupation, it is an accurate and up-to-date electronic record of the building as it is managed, maintained, repaired, refurbished and altered to support accountable persons in managing building safety. So that's the end of my presentation today, and thank you, and I'll hand you back.
Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to be moving on to the questions portion of the webinar. Just a reminder to send over your questions using the Ask the Questions tab if you haven't already. So one of the questions we've received from the audience is asking what factors should be considered when determining whether an existing fire door can be repaired rather than fully replaced? And is there any published guidance that supports this assessment process? They've also added in a bit of context and said, in practice, those undertaking the fire door surveys are often also carrying out the remedial or replacement works. So it can be sometimes quite difficult to ensure sufficient independence and consistency in the assessment of whether repair is genuinely appropriate.
Can I go?
Yeah, sure.
The conflict of interest between inspectors and those undertaking the repairs is highlighted fairly often. And I think there should be some discretion between doing a fire door inspection and then being able to tender for the work that's been exposed or identified during that inspection. I think it would be better if inspectors were independent of those undertaking the maintenance work.
On the whether to repair or replace as well, I think it really depends on what sort of condition the door is in. The overall inspection would need to detail, right, well, what needs rectified, how is that going to be done, and will any of the alterations affect, if it was an FT30, if it was an FT60, is the integrity of the door going to be maintained? Because that will determine whether a repair can be made. If it's something simple, then it's probably going to be okay. But if there's something, more substantial, then you would need to be assured and provided with suitable documentation that that fire door still has full integrity. So you need the evidence. You need to ask for the evidence and make sure that you are fully assured, because at the end of the day, as duty holders, it still comes back to you.
Just adding on what Graham said there, everything is bespoke and unique, and you need to absolutely assess the door in itself, looking at the core, the hinges, the ironmongery, absolutely everything on that door through through a competent individual to do that assessment. It's not a simple answer that you could give. A coverall answer here. It is absolutely bespoke to the door, and you need to ensure that whatever's been done to it has not compromised anything, and if anything's been added, will all those component parts work? So it's not something we can necessarily answer here, but we're well aware of, as Kevin has illustrated, sometimes a conflict of interest, which is why within our frameworks we absolutely strive for the installation qualifications and the third-party inspection qualifications separately, not a one-size-fits-all.
Zainab, can I just add on to that? I think Graham touched on it really, really nicely there. The first sort of point is actually knowing what the fire door is that you're considering. So, as Paul says, case by case, often quite a deep dive into the traceability, and then considering, as you say, any repairs. It's not just sort of, can you practically repair it, but it's, have you actually got the evidence to prove that it would still perform after the repair? I think one of the bits of the question was what published guidance is out there, and I would, there are a number of sources, but they are very, very specific, often tied back to some test evidence behind the scenes. Again, just to bring that maybe to life, a couple of the case studies that I get involved in, they're about going into existing buildings, understanding what's there, and then if repairs or remediations or upgrades need to be made, actually going and doing the testing or the due diligence to give the assurance that it would work afterwards. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So another question from the audience is, for older buildings where original test evidence or as-built data sheets for fire doors are missing, what's the panel's view on using field-validated remediation versus full replacement to satisfy the golden thread requirements for the safety case report?
I'll just start. Ultimately, you need to get single source of the truth. So you're going to have to assess what you're there to start building up your asset data, essentially. And as we've kind of already alluded to, it's probably not something we can necessarily answer here as a specific. We can only give general feedback in it. But yeah, you need a single source of the truth, and you're going to have to start building up your data and your knowledge of that to ensure that whatever you are building data-wise is absolutely accurate and truthful.
This is the lack of information around the fire safety measures in buildings, particularly where they fall under the fire safety order, is something that puzzles me, because since 2005, Regulation 38 of the building regulations has required that fire safety information is handed over to those buildings that would fall under the Fire Safety Order. And it is true that a lot of that information just doesn't exist. It's been either wasn't ever handed over originally, or has not been retained by the responsible person. So even though there is a legal requirement in building regulations to provide that information and a legal responsibility under the Fire Safety Order to have that information, then it is quite often it doesn't exist.
I think there's really the experiences that I've had where even where there is some or what looks to be a relatively full pack of documentation, the stage of actually going and verifying that documentation about as in sort of relevance to the as-built situation, I've found that actually that can really differ. So despite the fact that it looks sort of on the surface that there's a full pack of supporting information, it doesn't bear any relevance to actually what's in the building as well. And also to say, I will really sort of highlight, it's very rare that I would be stumbling upon a full pack of information. Even Kevin, as you say, in some of like the later buildings since 2005. So yeah, thank you.
I think I've been in previous roles at a medium-sized housing association in Scotland, and our existing information was exceptionally poor. So it comes to the point where realistically you have to think about the tenants and the tenant safety. Can you be fully assured that they will be protected? Because when you dial it all back, when you're talking about standards and regulations, everybody knows what they have to do. But the whole point of everything and highlighting these issues is to make sure that tenants are safe at night, and that you as a duty holder can go to bed at night and not be worried about your tenant safety. So I think if there's any sort of doubt, although there is, cost implications and disruption, you really need to consider, right, okay, well, I either can be fully assured with the existing products that we have in this building, and we can get, various businesses in to give us that assurance. But if you can't get that full assurance, you need to properly consider a full procurement process to replace them, so your tenant safety is in hand. That's certainly the outlook that we took when I was in a previous client role. So just consider wisely and make sure you're fully assured.
Fantastic, thank you. So more of a procedural question here, but someone wanted to ask, should the building control application be submitted by the contractor undertaking the works or by the property owner?
That sounds like a question related to a particular situation, but in general terms, the building regulations require the person responsible for the compliance with the building regulations is the person undertaking the building work. That could be the client. They could have passed that responsibility on to the principal contractor or contractors. They could then pass the responsibility down, but the application, depending on the context of the building, should be with the client or the principal contractor, I would say, or whoever's undertaking those roles. It just depends on whether that responsibility has been delegated down.
And although you can delegate it, you still need to be fully informed when you're doing it. So whoever is doing it on your behalf, you are still the kind of responsible party as the duty holder. So just make sure that whoever in your team is dealing with it, if it's not yourself, to make sure you have the evidence, make sure it's documented, and that you've properly summarised it and had it explained to you if you are delegating that.
Lovely, thanks. And just before we end, just a quick question. Is there a time scale for undertaking fire door repairs or replacements from the point of discovering an issue resulting in non-compliance?
That would be subject to the risk assessment. some repairs aren't considered to be high risk. They can be set on a lower priority, but obviously the ones that are considered high risk should be done probably immediately, because they've identified that there is a high risk to the fire safety of occupants in that building.
Yeah, I've got a situation where I'm on the board for a housing association. There's a building that's affected, and it's categorised. So we've had a risk assessment undertaken. We've identified issues with cladding, with fire doors, and various other bits and bobs in the building. And each has a timescale which rectification is required. Obviously, the more serious the issue, it should be dealt with immediately, and if necessary, a decant if there's tenants at risk. But it's all proportional, and you need to get the expert advice and the risk assessment in place to know. But if in doubt, then obviously act immediately.
Right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. So we've come to the end of the webinar. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you so much to our wonderful panel of experts. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you.